makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part.
Welcome to the third update on the Russian-Ukrainian war. This is for 25th of February, so towards the end of the second full day of fighting on that side of the world. And well, there is some good news is that Ukraine's defense appears to be working. Russia has not achieved the objectives that it set out at the beginning of the conflict, and I think it was really caught unaware of the scale of the defense, the preparedness of the Ukrainian defenders, and also probably estimated their own capabilities. And I'm going to talk a bit about that in a bit. So let's look at the situation on the ground. And I will always start with the same caveat. Um, Information is very fast moving. We don't know exactly what is going on. Um, there is a lot of contradictory news. You know, a city's been taken here, recaptured here, major Ukrainian losses here, major Russian losses as well. It's really hard. You know, it'll take days before we can truly digest what is going on. But in the meantime, I think what can be said with some degree of certainty is Russia is struggling. It is struggling. And even though it maintains the strategic momentum of this war, that is, Russia can dictate exactly where it's going to push forward, what scale of forces it's going to use, what mix of forces it's going to use as well. That doesn't always translate to having the tactical initiative, which I suspect that Ukraine has in most of the areas that are currently engaged in fighting. Now, I want to give you an example of how this has happened in the past. One very good example of this was the Battle of Normandy, and I'm not talking about D-Day, which was by and large an overwhelming Allied success. I'm talking about the 2 months after D-Day, in which the Allies really, really struggled to achieve a breakthrough in the Normandy front. This has been considered by many one of the most brilliant examples of tactical proficiency by a defending army in the history of warfare, because the German army was outnumbered man to man, and especially in terms of material, was absolutely overwhelmingly outnumbered by the British and US armies. There was never any, even the vaunted SS Panzer divisions and Panzer Grenadier divisions were really low on major equipment. So it was really the tactical proficiency of the troops on the ground, able to dictate the terms of where they're going to defend, where they're going to hold out, where they're going to retreat, where they're going to tactically regroup. The German army was kind of like killing a worm. That you cut it in half, but then the two halves of the worm are still alive. So you would have units that would be destroyed, apparently destroyed on the battlefield, and all that would end up is having tiny isolated groups form into ad hoc battle groups that would keep on fighting. It was absolutely an amazing defense. So I suspect that Ukraine is having sort of similar successes on at a tactical level, even if, again, looking at the broader strategic picture, it is Russia which maintains and will maintain for the time being, if not for the entirety of the conflict, the strategic momentum. So, map. Uh, Not much has changed. I'm going to show another updated map in a bit, although unfortunately the website I think is, actually I'm going to show it now. This is the live UA map. It's very good. The problem is I think it's getting so much traffic that it's collapsing. Either that or it's getting a Russian cyber attack, which I actually don't think so. But it's probably getting a lot of traffic right now, and so I'm a bit afraid. I managed to keep it on earlier today. I'm afraid to refresh it because I feel it's gonna disappear. But that is the situation right now. Now, if you saw my previous video yesterday, I mentioned that the part of the front that appeared more concerning was the south, where the Russian advance had been deeper. They had a two-pronged attack, uh, breaking away from the Crimea. So one prong of the attack went west, arrived at a city here called I forget the name. I'm sorry. And then there was a right prong or east prong that went towards Mariupol, which is right here. And Mariupol apparently was captured. Now, my suspicion at the time was that Ukraine wasn't really attempting a serious defense of this area, which, quite frankly, is strategically useless. There is no major cities in that area. It's, looks a bit unpopulated. It's also terrible defending territory because it's very flat and it doesn't have any, real, yeah, there's absolutely nothing. It's just farmland, barely any trees, etc. Not that many, the towns around here are very, very small. Um, I mean, they're not even towns, they're just basically like tiny little farm settlements. And Melitopol is the only sort of mid-sized city. It's not that huge, but it's sizable. Compared to the more rugged terrain in the eastern part of Ukraine, where you have, uh, you know, it's still very flat, but it does have rivers and creeks. It does have forests, so it's easier to make, to have small ambush teams, and it also forces the Russians to use the roads. Um, and if you're using the roads in very wooded terrain where there's lots of villages along the way, it's an absolute benefit for the defender, especially if what they're using are kind of nimble infantry squads armed with javelin anti-tank missiles, things like that. They can easily hide, they can easily retreat, and I think that is what Ukraine is doing. They're basically hitting the Russian spearheads, like chipping at it bit by bit. They're not rushing into a major confrontation. I think that is incredibly smart. And like I said, my suspicion was that they were trading uh, territory uh, and time and letting the Russians kind of move in here. I suspect the objective of the Russians are Odessa on this side, which they don't have the capability of taking it through an amphibious assault, and obviously Mariupol, which is really the prize of the Donbass region. Donetsk and Mariupol are the two big prizes in the Donbass region. And the surprising thing is that Russia has apparently had like zero advance whatsoever in the Donbass. So I don't know if there are. I honestly think that there's not that much activity going on there. I mean, the map does show that there is activity, but I'm not sure that the Russians are really putting in as much as maybe they thought this was the areas that Ukraine would kind of defend most. So that what they were really wanted to do was this push from the south and then around Kiev. I don't know. I honestly don't know. But very few of the videos that I've seen on Twitter, from the ground, are in that region. So I honestly don't think that there's that much activity. So it could be that they were planning to push towards Mariupol from the south. And if the Ukrainians are aware of this, I suspect they are getting NATO intelligence. I'm going to talk about that in a bit as well. But yeah, so I don't know what. But it also looks like, at least since I went to sleep last night and this morning, there doesn't seem to have been much more of an advance from the Russians here. There are reports of small arms fire in Mariupol. Now, I want to be very, very clear about what this means. We get a lot of reports that, like, oh, there's reports of shooting in downtown Kiev, or this does not mean that the Russians are attacking downtown Kiev. Uh, what is happening is, like every army, especially in a fast-moving, fluid, modern, mechanized battlefield, there will be advanced groups, recon, force recon type units, saboteurs, etc., that will be trying to prod the defenses. They're going to see where they can infiltrate, cause some havoc and chaos while they're at it. There's reports, for example, of markers being painted on buildings in Kiev, probably for showing aircraft pathways, things like that. So this does not mean just because there is a small advanced force that is fighting, having some shootout in the middle of a city, does not mean that that's where the bulk of the Russian army is there. So take those with a pinch of salt. And so we also, what other news we have? Uh, no advance, not much advance around Kharkov, and apparently the advance here in sort of the northeast part of the Ukraine has also not been that successful. So it looks like they've made an incursion, but it doesn't look like it's been successful. Now, the other critical part of the front, along with the south, or rather, I would say the most important front right now, is around Kiev. And yesterday, the Ukrainians scored a massive victory over the Russians in this airfield over here, the Hostomel airfield over here, which, by the way, happens to be the test ground for the Antonov company. I think I mentioned this yesterday. And I believe the world's largest aircraft, which is the Antonov 224, where only one of them have been built, is located there. I don't know if it's been destroyed. I don't know if it managed to fly away at some point. It'd be a real shame. That's a very impressive aircraft. You can Google it if you want. Antonov 224. It's a six-engine massive transport plane. And only one was built because the Soviet Union collapsed just before, well, while the plane was being in development, and there weren't funds to build any more of them. But Antonov builds the world's largest transport planes. The Antonov 124 is also very large. I believe it's larger than the American C-5, which is the largest U.S. Air Force transport plane. But yeah, those are the two biggest transport planes in the world right now, and the AN-224 is even bigger. So, as a bit of an aviation geek, I really hope that aircraft survived. But yeah, anyway. It appears that a very ambitious Russian air assault on the airbase failed spectacularly. There was an ongoing battle that raged for various hours, and in the end, Ukrainian special forces managed to defeat the entire Russian airborne troops and recaptured the airfield. And that is very impressive. Russia's airborne troops well, Russia has the biggest number of airborne troops of any army in the world. They are very well trained. They are, elites in the same way as, for example, the U.S. Marines are an elite. But yeah, it was. Now there are reports that Russia has continued to press on in this direction, and I saw a claim that it had been captured with 200 Ukrainian special forces dead and 0 Russian casualties. And of course, this sounds like complete bullshit. This was reported on Russian media, I should add. That sounds like complete bullshit. I don't deny that it may have been captured. In fact, it probably has been. But again, I also read reports that it's been destroyed. So, this will be of no use. This airfield has been of no use to Ukraine. It doesn't have any strategic value to Ukraine. Being so close to the front lines. But for Russia, it would be useful to airlift troops there because it's a big runway. I mean, if it can fit the biggest plane in the world, then it's a big enough runway for any number of transport planes. But from what I have read, it's been destroyed. So maybe that was the reason why they did the air assault. They wanted to capture it before it was destroyed. They failed, and now they've managed to capture it the hard way, but too late. So anyway, there are reports of small scale combat inside Kiev. Again, this is not surprising. There will be recon units inside Kiev. They will be prodding the defenses. They're going to see where, what axis to take if the bulk of the Russian army decides to go on a full-scale urban assault, which will be bloody. Will be bloody. It will be very bloody for civilians, even if, as Putin has supposedly promised, that they are not targeting civilians. And I do suspect, at least for the moment, at least in this phase of the war, there is some truth to that. I don't. It doesn't look at least in the first 48 hours, that Russia is deliberately targeting civilian, uh, you know, the civilian population. That is obviously a good thing, but things can change if they start to lose the momentum. If they get bogged down in the urban combat, anything's on the table. But at least for the moment, nothing suggests that Russia is seriously, like deliberately attacking the civilian population. So, yeah, that is kind of the state of play right now. So, not like I said, not much changed versus the first day of the war. Um, there wasn't much progress in the south beyond this, and again, I do suspect that Russia is aware of the risk if it notices that Ukraine isn't really fighting. There's a reason for that, and it would be like incredibly stupid if Russia sort of assaulted Mariupol from this direction, and there was some Ukrainian armored reserve around here, and they could pull off another Marne for the Battle of the Marne, 1924. Sorry, 1914, when the German attack in the outskirts of Paris made an unfortunate last-minute pivot to the east and was attacked by a French army that they didn't know was there, and they got their butts kicked, and probably changed the history of the remainder of the 20th century. So yeah, uh, for the moment, I think there won't be any major breakthrough in this part of the front yet. I still think the southern and the Kiev fronts are the ones to look for in the next 24 hours. Um, I also think that at least when it comes to Kiev, there will be more incursions over the course of the night. Nighttime is a very good moment for Russia to infiltrate more special forces, more recon troops into the city, cause chaos, prod the defenses, etc. Like I said, this does not mean that the bulk of the army is there. Now, the other thing that I think is worth mentioning is how many troops is Russia actually using? And I've seen mixed reports. I've seen something that around 60,000 troops are involved in the fighting. So this is out of the 190,000 that have been deployed in the region. That is, by the way, 2/3 of Russia's entire army has been deployed. That's a massive deployment. Like proportionally to the size of their army, this is way bigger than even the Gulf War. Uh, so in the Gulf War, the U.S. Mobilized about, I would say, a quarter to a third of its combat power against Iraq. Um, Russia is mobilizing 2/3 of its army against Ukraine. So that is a huge number. And now the reports that I've seen that there's actually about 50 to 60,000 troops suggests that a large amount of them are not fighting. So why are they not fighting? Two reasons. One is, first of all, Putin may have overestimated the capability of the Ukrainian defenders and decided not to risk his entire army uh, in the first couple of days. That is one, which means that you know the momentum of the Russian attack will not dissipate anytime soon, insofar as they have large numbers of follow-up troops. The other is when you look at numbers, at sheer numbers, 190,000 troops. A lot of those are supply and logistics troops. Most modern armies have a bigger tail, uh, teeth to tail ratio. That's the term in military jargon. And that's because obviously modern mechanized armies require a lot of support troops. Tanks and APCs break down. They need to be repaired. You need troops to repair them. Um, all of this counts in those numbers, but these aren't troops that are actually involved in the fighting. So uh, again, it is estimated that this is involving around 60 battalion tactical groups, which sort of fits into that 60,000 number. A battalion is around 800 to 1,000 troops, depending on the army. These battalion tactical groups have more levels of independent operation capability than a normal battalion that is attached to like an infantry or armored division. So they do have some bigger scope for independent operation, which requires more troops. It requires them to have some supply troops attached to those units that a normal battalion wouldn't have. So, on one hand, I definitely do think that there is a significant reserve of Russian combat troops that could be put into the battle at any time. But on the other hand, this idea that all those 190,000 troops are actually combat troops is false. So I would love to have more clarification of these numbers of 60,000 troops are currently deployed, if that refers only to the combat troops and not the teeth and not the tail. So I don't know. The other thing is I think that if I was Putin, I would have gone all out, or I would have tried to make this as quick war as possible, because Russia will face a supply problem very, very quickly. When I say very, very quickly, I mean pretty much after the week is over. Russia is a huge army. If you actually compare the equipment that it actually has more tanks in active service than the U.S. does. It has more infantry fighting vehicles. It has more artillery. So that is impressive for an army that really its spending for the armed forces is not much higher than that of a Western European mid-power like the UK or France. So Russia spends about 60 billion on defense each year, whereas countries like the UK spend 59. So there's only a tiny difference. But the size of the Russian armed forces is way, way bigger than Britain's. So something has to give. You can't maintain an army that big with the funds that would take a Western European country a much tinier military. So my suspicion is that they have to make some sacrifices, and those sacrifices include uh, a smaller logistical train. Um, they have a lot of high-tech weapons, but not much stocks of them. So, if you go to an arms fair, you'll see tons of shiny Russian weapons, but some of them might not yet even be deployed with any actual unit, and if they are, not in big numbers. So it's an army that likes to show its might. When you see military parades every year in Red Square. But for example, you haven't seen any T-14 Armata tanks, um, which have existed already for various years. That's Russia's most advanced main battle tank. You're not going to see them. I can guarantee you will not see them because they have too few of them. Same with like the hypersonic missiles that even NATO doesn't have. You're not going to see many of them used. So the more the war that drags on, the less amount of high-tech weaponry that they will be able to employ. And so even if they end up deploying more of their troops, it's going to be in a condition where they won't be able to have that kind of support from cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, etc. So all of this favors the defender. And yeah, let's move on to some of the. Here's a good thread that kind of backs up a lot of what I've been saying. Some of the early impressions of the last 2 days. It's an operation with maximalist war aims, and Moscow's thinking on this war seems to have colored by war optimism. It looked as though Russian forces were expecting a quicker Ukrainian military collapse and easier gains. Early campaign to knock out Ukrainian air defenses and air force had mixed results. Russian aerospace forces aren't particularly practiced at suppression of enemy air defense. So that is, for example, using aircraft to fire anti-radiation missiles. Those are basically missiles that home in on radars. The U.S. is very, very capable at this, by the way. NATO as well. Most of the strikes in the opening phase were via cruise missiles. Ukrainian Air Force still has some aircraft up. A brazen heliborne assault to take Hostomel airport with a small airborne element was a puzzling move. It wasn't. I don't think it was puzzling. I think it was very risky and daring, and clearly in a context of them assuming that the Ukrainians' defense was going to just collapse, which it didn't. I doubt the goal was to land more airborne at a contested airport easily covered by artillery and multiple launch rocket systems. Likely they expected to hold out for ground reinforcement. Yeah. So far, we've seen only a fraction of the Russian force arrayed for the operation. Unclear if Russian forces reached initial objectives. Best estimate is they expected more rapid gains and less resistance. Russian forces seem to be avoiding use of mass fires, except maybe around Kharkiv, focusing on trying to make a speedy advance. Expect they will revert to much larger use of fires when frustrated, not seeing much in the way of cyber and less electronic warfare effects than many anticipated. This is a very interesting point, and I want to give my hot take on it, which is entirely conjecture. And that is that Russia has actually attempted this and failed. Or rather, these attempts have been thwarted. There's no reason Russia would not use one of its main war-fighting assets, which is its cyber attack capabilities and electronic warfare capabilities. There's no reason they wouldn't have done this from the very moment. It's basically free. It's riskless. You don't suffer casualties from doing this, and they didn't do it, or it doesn't seem like they succeeded. So crazy conspiracy time. Perhaps NATO is assisting Ukraine in more ways than we know of. And one of those ways could be in counter cyber warfare and counter electronic warfare. This would be, we might not find out for a long time, but that is my gut feeling. That is my gut feeling. You heard it here first. Russian forces are mainly sticking to the road network. Early advances made by recon troops driving along roads left support units open to ambushes. Again, this is the point that I've been making about small recon units advancing into cities, etc. But then you see a lot of photos of like the tail of the units supporting them getting blasted. So yeah, it's risky moves, to some extent necessary, but yeah. Already signs of urban warfare and firefights in cities. There has been heavy fighting around Kharkiv and Simi. Russian forces tried to advance past Oktyurka. It looked like they're attempting to go around Kharkiv. There's also an advance west of Simi to Konotop. This is a very incomplete picture. Yeah, main breakout appears to be in the south from Crimea. Again, this is exactly what I said. Russian forces pushed to Kherson. That's the city to the left of Crimea that I forgot the name of. And Melitopol are sustained fighting for Kherson, still around Antonovsky Bridge. Some early signs they may have entered Mykolaiv, but probably just a recon element. Russian forces retain a significant quantitative and qualitative superiority. Yep, that is what I've been insisting. Ukraine forces have demonstrated resolve and resilience. Russian conventional overmatch, such as it is, may not translate into attaining their maximalist political aims. This is just the opening of the war. Yep, I mean, this sounds exactly like what I've been saying. Yeah, what's the latest from the videos? Airstrikes, saboteurs captured. This was worrying. So there's been reports of Topol M. These are ICBM launchers in Moscow. I've said it. I'll say it again. I do think that if Russia looks like it's not going to win this war, may end up taking the nuclear option. By that I mean literally. And I think that using an ICBM is pushing it. An ICBM would have entirely, a strategic kill people objective. I would find it more likely that they'd be using tactical nukes. This could be just an attempt to scare people, knowing that, someone in their cars on a busy road will take notice. So I think this is more of a psychological move. I don't think they would use. I do think they could use nuclear weapons, but I suspect they would start with tactical ones, not these. Yeah, and again, you would not show this in public. Yeah, so that's what's been going on. What else, if there's anything interesting? Oh, there were some satellite photos of a lot of attack and transport helicopters in southern Belarus, so they might be preparing something here. I don't know if this is consistent with a planned assault on Kiev. I don't think the airborne troops would go into Kiev. That would be incredibly, incredibly risky. But they could have some tactical objectives around the city where they can deploy this. It seems to me that the air defenses around Kiev are still quite formidable. So this is, and that was also part of the reason why the attack on the airbase failed initially. They couldn't get enough troops there. They couldn't paradrop more reinforcements, which apparently they had planned. So this is a risk to the Russians. Yeah. What else? Yeah, I think that's yeah, nothing I think that changes the narrative of what we've been discussing on this channel for the past day or two. And so now moving on to other stuff. Putin has apparently now threatened Finland and Sweden with military and political consequences.
OSCE's national members and providing security is the national sovereignty, and Finland and Sweden should not base their security based on damaging security of other countries, and their accession to NATO can have detrimental consequences and face some military and political consequences. And second question, head of Donbass.
Yeah, Putin is absolutely deranged. Absolutely deranged, and this sounds to me like the tough talk of someone who's actually not winning the war but wants to make it sound like he's winning the war. Yeah, he has justified every reason why NATO should exist today, and why every country that borders Russia, it is in their best interest to join NATO. I mean, I'm sorry, there is no other way to see this. No other way to see it. If NATO had a moment of obsolescence, it was immediately after the Cold War, before someone like Putin came to power in Russia. But now that he is there, yeah, they've completely justified the claim of NATO's existence. And now let's look at some of the more deranged Twitter takes from deranged people like Kim Iversen. Today I'm not going to focus on the anti-war left. I've done that enough in the last two ones. Now I'm going to focus on the dumb left, or rather the leftists who aren't really leftist but are just grifting. And Kim Iversen is basically, her talking points are indistinguishable from Tucker Carlson, who has also been simping for Russia lately. And yeah, Kim Iversen Zelensky has asked Putin to begin talks, eventually suggesting surrender. This is not happening. She's lying. She's lying. I really think World War III is a bad idea. Russia's taking out the military equipment given to Ukraine by the US. Bullshit. The majority of Ukrainian equipment is of Soviet origin. They're still using, the Sukhoi 27, MiG-29s, T-72 tanks, BTR APCs, BMP infantry fighting vehicles. This is all, they're using the same equipment that Russia is using. Less sophisticated versions, but it's kind of the same thing. I think they should let it go. They should remain peaceful and renegotiate with Putin a diplomatic solution. Come on. You just want Putin to win. Ukrainians are conscripted into military service, which makes this extra tragic. She needs to get the memo that there is conscription in Russia, and Russian troops, and especially their conscripts, face really brutal conditions. Incredible amount of abuse and bullying by superiors. It is not the Russian military is not a nice place to be. Not a nice place to be, especially for conscripts. So this is, what's sad about this is that if she was paid by the Kremlin, it would be less obvious. That's what's sad about people like her. According to a poll cited in the New York Times, 43% of Ukrainians are willing to fight the Russians. Does that sound like a high or low number to you? Maybe she should ask how many Russians want to fight Ukrainians, and I'm sure that number is way smaller. I love how on Twitter I'm the baddie for not being all about war. No, you're just all about Russia getting whatever it wants. You're all about Russian imperialism. You're all about Russian aggression. You just don't want any resistance. This is like basically saying I'm anti-war. Poland should just not resist its Nazi invasion. I'm sure she would have said that if Twitter existed in 1939. She would have totally been pro-Nazi in every way. French should not resist. Just give up. Poland, resist, not give up. Let Hitler take over the world. She'd be total Hitler simp. Because she's a fascist. She is a fascist. Yeah. There's another really good one here. Yeah, Ukraine shouldn't fight back. No one should. Let it go. Yeah, let's just let our country be invaded by a madman. It's fine. If Ukraine fights back, it'll be devastating and the outcome won't be any different. They can't fight Russia on this. No one can. Best to let it go now and use democracy in the future. Don't kill yourself. Seriously. Fuck that shit. Fuck that shit. They're not losing. Yeah. Amazing. Here's another good one. Jimmy Dore. Again, another non-leftist. He's a full-blown right-winger now. With Max Blumenthal of the Grey Zone. The most imbecilic piece of dumbass journalism you will find.
Of the Ukraine military is neo-Nazis, for real, right? And it's called the Azov Battalion is one of them. And I think the number 2 guy in charge in Ukraine is a freaking neo-Nazi. And so...
he's a Jew. He's a Jew. You're a fucking idiot. He's a Jew.
They're fighting right over here. Let me just finish this video. And they've been fighting over here since 2015. They've been shelling 14,000 people, and the people here all speak Russian.
Now, President Putin made another big move. He's ordered Russian soldiers to go into the separatist areas. He says they're peacekeepers.
We've been speaking to.
So, has he ordered soldiers into those areas?
There's discussion of it. The Russian Duma has authorized force if necessary, but those photographs were not of any official Russian forces operating within the Donbass region. There is currently no evidence that Russian forces have entered the Donbass region.
So the neo-Nazi Ukraine regime has been shelling and terrorizing those people in Donbass. And so what Putin did was recognize that area as its own separate country now, right? And so that's going to could trigger a war between Russia and Ukraine. They engineered a coup of the democratically elected government in Ukraine and replaced it with a neo-Nazi regime. And I'm not making that up.
Actually, you have made everything up, Jimmy. Everything up. That's what you get from getting your foreign policy takes from the Grey Zone, especially from an absolute idiot like Max Blumenthal. But, sadly, I'm seeing a lot of my friends, a lot of Mexican friends, make these same arguments. The anti-war left is full of shit. I will say it again and again and again. And there's going to be a very big reckoning. A lot of them will have the epiphany if they're smart enough and realize how wrong they were. But a lot of them are just going to dig deeper into the rabbit hole because that's what humans do. So, in the end, what do I think is happening? I wrote this on Twitter yesterday at, today, 2:16 a.m. I'm calling it, if the Russians don't achieve a breakthrough in today's fighting, they've lost it. And I am even more confident right now that I made the right call. We'll see by the end of the day. We'll see what happens around Kiev. I think Ukraine is in a very good position to continue successfully resisting. By losing the war, I don't mean that Ukraine is going to crush the Russian army. I want to be clear about that. I don't think that anyone reasonably thinks that, but you can lose wars even with your army intact, as the US knows very well in Vietnam and Afghanistan. So the objective of war is to achieve a political aim, and that is Russia's political aim is to not only eliminate Ukraine's current government and set up a government that is keen on Russian interests, but also to demilitarize the country. And that is Russia's war aims. And as it is, I don't think they are much closer to achieving them. So insofar as Ukraine can deny those political objectives to Russia, they won. They won that war. So yeah, we'll see if I'm right. We'll see if I'm right. Meantime, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like, please share. Most importantly, please subscribe. And I will see you tomorrow with another update, or maybe tonight if something interesting happens. So yeah, see you later.